The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show bonus show. I am Farron Cousins sitting in for David Pakman. We need to talk about marijuana for a little bit. In the last couple days, there's been a lot of little reports popping up here and there about the Trump administration's ongoing war against legalized marijuana. Now, this is something that Jeff Sessions has basically considered a bit of a pet issue for him. Guy's always been hardcore anti-marijuana, even though studies are showing that, yes, medicinally, this stuff is a miracle. And recreationally, we're finding it not only helps economies, but also helps to get people off opioids. There's a lot of positives and not too many downsides at this point. But that hasn't stopped the administration from coming up with what is now a Marijuana Policy Coordination Committee. That's what they created, the White House created. Marijuana Policy Coordination Committee. Their job that they have been tasked with is to go around, find every study possible talking about how horrible marijuana is, compile it into a database, and then use that to help de-legalize marijuana in places where it has been legalized, and of course to prevent the spread of legalized marijuana, both at the state and potentially the federal level. They are once again, as we've seen on so many issues, moving the country backwards. And our marijuana policy here in the United States had been backwards for decades, for nearly 100 years. And then finally, in the last few years, we've seen progress on it. But now they want to hide any kind of study, report, expert who dare say that, hey, there's actually some positive benefits to marijuana, and only promote the negative, which is exactly what led to the illegalization of marijuana in the first place. That's why this was illegal. A smear campaign ran about 100 years ago, and one of the talking points at the time, and this was actually in testimony before Congress, was that smoking marijuana made white women want to dance and be amorous with black men. That was one of the selling points for making marijuana illegal here in the United States. And I can almost promise you that Jeff Sessions actually believes that. That is probably something that man absolutely thinks is a thing that happens. But here we are. We're in the middle of an opioid epidemic here in the United States that is killing more than 100 people every single day. And we also know that states that have legalized recreational marijuana and medical marijuana actually have lower rates of opioid addiction and deaths. And there is a direct correlation between the two. Medical marijuana is able to do the same kind of pain relief thing that opioids are able to do, except, without the deadly addiction that comes along with it. We are seeing decreased violence. We are seeing increased marijuana tourism to these areas where the economy is pulling in all kinds of new tax dollars as a result of this. There are far more upsides to this than there are downsides. But unfortunately, we have too many people in this country stuck in that 1980s just say no mentality. And yes, there's a lot of bad drugs out there. Don't get me wrong. Marijuana, just based on what we know now, doesn't happen to be one of them. And that's why this Marijuana Policy Committee, Task Force, Conference, whatever, is trying to bury the positive studies, highlight the negatives, then use that to roll back our policies to what they were in the 1920s. You know what else is actually approaching the levels it was in the 1920s? The gaps between the haves and the have-nots. In fact, I think it's actually way more than it was back in the 1920s. But a new study came out this week that found out that some of the worst offenders in the pay gap between their CEOs and their average workers also happen to be companies here in the U.S. that are pulling in our tax dollars either through subsidies or federal contracts. Here's some of the stuff. This is from a new study, the Executive Excess Report from the Institute for Policy Studies. It says more than 2/3 of the top 50 government contractors and top 50 recipients of federal subsidies receive a total of $170 billion from taxpayers. They currently pay their chief executive officer more than 100 times their median worker pay. 100 times. And these are companies that have taken in $167 billion of your tax dollars, my tax dollars, everybody's tax dollars. So we're actually giving them a ton of our money, and they're using it to give their CEO exorbitant pay. Here's a few of the worst offenders. The top of those: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. And if you don't know what all those have in common, they all happen to be the top military contractors making weapons, jets, and planes that we use to go drop bombs on people all over the world. CEOs there each earn an average of about $21 million, which is between 166 and 218 times greater than what they pay their average workers. Geo Group, the massive private prison company that's profiting greatly off of contracts to build prisons for all of these immigrants that we're separating here in the United States. Their CEO makes 271 times what the average worker is making. Then we have, of course, Walmart, which, yes, they do receive federal tax dollars, subsidies, and contracts. Their CEO made 1,188 times the amount that most Walmart workers make in a year. 1,188 times as much. It's bad enough when you have these stories about excessive CEO pay. It becomes a whole other thing when you find out that these companies are getting our tax dollars to do these things. You know, the exorbitant pay that their CEOs are getting, that's at our expense. You know what else is at our expense? The federal programs that these workers have to depend upon, like those at Disney, those at Walmart, in order to survive because the company they work for doesn't pay them enough. Bernie Sanders actually recently proposed legislation that would make corporations who do not pay their workers enough and the workers then have to rely on federal assistance, it would make those companies have to pay the federal government back for those assistance programs that their workers have to be on. I support that 100%. These workers are the backbones of these companies. They're the reason these companies are profitable. I mean, if you don't have anybody down in your factory making your things, out in your farms, anywhere, then you don't have goods to sell. Then you don't make any money. So you're making all your money off the backs of the workers. You're making your money from these federal contracts. We're paying that. And then you pay them poverty wages so that we not only have to pay you tons of money, but now we have to provide federal assistance for these people who are working full-time jobs, but still can't get by because you're so greedy, because you're taking in almost 1,200 times more than what you're paying your workers, like Walmart's doing. Yeah, Walmart can afford to pay the government back for that. But more importantly, and this is actually the purpose of Sanders' proposal, it's not to just make them pay back the government. It's to find a way to force them to pay their workers more, pay them a living wage. That's the ultimate goal of this. It's not that he's saying we want the government to have their money back. It's if you're not going to give the money to your workers, then you're going to hand it over to the government. And I can guarantee you at the end of the day, when corporations see that, they're going to say, all right, fine, we'll give it to the workers. Now they don't have to be on federal assistance anymore. And that's the best way to go. Attack them in the pocketbook, and you're always going to win. And finally today, this is a big win. It's a great positive story to finally end the week on. California, this week, the state assembly passed legislation that would turn the state of California into a 100% renewable energy state by the year 2045. They would get California utilities to get half their energy from wind, solar, and other renewable sources by the year 2026. They then have another 4 years to get it to 60% renewable. Then they have another 15 years to get it to 100% renewable. Now, the reason according to the state, that these numbers, that they're giving it 2045 instead of, say, 2035 or 2025, is because right now they do not have the technology. They're saying it doesn't actually exist to be able to get to 100%. It's a very large state, lots of people using electricity. You've got areas of the state that are exceptionally hot, and electricity usage goes way through the roof. Nights and evenings when people get home from work, the air conditioners kick on, and it really drains the power grid. Purely renewable energy, they're saying at this point they do not have enough of it to fully supply these specific areas. They're trying to come up with new and better batteries that can store more of what's captured during the day so that they can get to this point. But this is a phenomenal story, and it is a story that other states need to watch. They need to pay attention, and they need to start setting their own goals. Right now, as a country, the United States is so far behind everybody else on the rest of the planet in terms of switching over to renewables. And instead, we're doubling down on fossil fuels. Trump swears up and down he's going to bring coal back to the United States, something that even coal miners are saying is actually impossible to do. Coal companies admit it's impossible to do. Hell, they even admitted that Obama never launched a war on coal. And yet, we're still going back to that. An energy source that has been used by mankind since before the United States was even a thing. But California is looking forward. They're looking ahead. They, as a state, also understand how devastating the effects of climate change are going to be, since they're getting it from the coast, they're getting it from the sky with their droughts, and now they're getting it in the form of massive wildfires. They're responding to what's happening on the planet. The rest of this country needs to do the same before they find themselves in similar situations. And that is all the time we have for today. Once again, thank you to David Pakman and everyone at the David Pakman Show for allowing me to fill in this week. I am Farron Cousins. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.